Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of How to Maintain Happiness Throughout Your Life. This episode is based on Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and today I'm going to discuss Habit 2, Begin with the End in Mind. So I'll go over to the slideshow here. There we go. So how he starts off, and you'll see that this is a recurring theme very much throughout many of the books, is he talks about a contemplation of death. We are mortal beings, and many spiritual traditions, Buddhism included, do encourage us to contemplate our death, and the idea being the more you contemplate your death, the more value you can bring to your life, and also more perspective, because we tend to get sidetracked by things that really don't matter in the end. And if I had to summarize this chapter, I would summarize it as: think deeply before you act, and what are you really trying to achieve? So by beginning with the end in mind means have a mental conception and a clear picture of what you're doing before you actually go to do something. So, and then, when we say begin with the end in mind, and we combine that with the contemplation of death, that of course is the ultimate end, the end of our life. But of course, we can break that down into all the little projects that we do throughout life. And the one thing that I would say is this, in terms of what kind of legacy do you want to leave behind, and what will you want people to say about you at your funeral? And in terms of legacy, don't lose sight of your relationships. Don't replace money and wealth with relationships, because I did an earlier thing on the top regrets of the dying. I can't remember how many there were. And then there was another one, the happiness study. Those two really show that relationships have the biggest impact on our happiness. Then he goes into this thing as whenever we want to create something, we first create the conceptual, something in our mind, and then we bring that to fruition. We bring it into the physical. And we cannot skip the conceptual. Can we skip the conceptual? In reality, yes. We could just go straight to the acting part when we want to accomplish something, but Stephen Covey strongly advises us against doing this. And then as human beings, he talks about unique human capacities. Human beings are self-aware. And also another thing too, I would add, we're self-aware. We're aware of our own death. We're aware of our own mortality. Whether animals have that capacity, I'm not sure. We also have the capacity for imagination and the capacity for conscience. So imagine self-awareness. He doesn't really have a definition of it, but it's self-explanatory. But imagination is the ability to visualize worlds not yet created. And then conscience is basically what guides us to create, or at least carry out, projects and act in a way in the world that is in alignment with our values. So, and then a big chunk of this chapter is all about the personal mission statement. We have all heard about businesses having mission statements, but having a personal mission statement is also a good idea, because this is something that will guide us throughout life and helps us make decisions and things like that. And again, what sort of person do you want to be? And what do you want to accomplish in life? The two things to focus on. So somewhere in the book he talks about the center of influence. Actually, that's right. That is the last That is habit one, expanding our center of influence. This is all about being proactive, taking on responsibilities. And then he talks about the four things that influence our center of influence. That's poorly worded, but so wisdom is your perspective on life. Security is your sense of worth. Power is your faculty or capacity to act. He didn't really give anything on the guidance or conscience, but that's self-explanatory. Your conscience will determine how big your center of influence, or where your center of influence will be, I guess, at the end of the day. So it's just repeated again. The at least the three of the four things. Okay, and then I have it on healthy focus, but he uses the word centeredness. I think it'll become clear when I start to go through this. And um, people, and I'm sure we've met people like this in the world, have an unhealthy focus, I would call. And he lists different things that are unhealthy. So there are people who are focused on their spouse, and I'm paraphrasing here, but I would argue that if we're focused on their spouse, or you see the second bullet point, family, we become too enmeshed with those people. And what happens is then our emotional lives are tied into the emotional lives of either our spouse or our family members. So if our spouse or family is going through a hard time, or maybe they're even doing stuff to damage their own lives. Well, what we don't want is to be dragged down to that level. We want to maintain our sense of self-worth, even if they may not have that sense of self-worth. And one of the obvious things, well, I don't want to say obvious because we're all guilty of chasing after money, but money, think of money as a tool, but don't put your life focus around money, because what ends up happening is you sacrifice relationships for money. And there are many stories of people who are rich and wealthy, they got lots of power, but they're very miserable in life. The other thing is work focus, where your identity is linked to your job. I would certainly argue in this day and age, with all the layoffs that are happening, if you work for a company, I don't know about, well, even a family business, it becomes harder, but certainly if you work for a large company, large companies have no loyalty to you. The board of directors, the investors say, cut the payroll. We need to make more money. Well, you're out of a job at that point in time. Definitely, that doesn't mean to say don't do your job, but don't have any loyalty to the company that you work for. And I was going to say in a small family business, but you tend to create more personal relationships in a small family business. However, even at that case, if they go under, they're going to feel really, really bad of you losing your job. Much more so, I would argue, much more so than a corporation. But it's out of their control. What can they do about it? He talks about possession centeredness or possession focus. So that's very much tied into the money focus, but in that sense, we're buying things. There is a book out there talking about the wealthy people. And if you walk around or drive around, let's say you drive around your city or town, and if you're driving around the rich part of town where you see the big mansions with the Porsches and the Lamborghinis and things like that, the reality is that the people who study wealth, those actually aren't wealthy people. They're basically spending every money that they make a lot of money for sure, but they're spending every dime that they make on material possessions. So, and consumerism, again, we've all heard of consumerism. It's killing us and killing the planet. Pleasure focus is another one. if you become too hedonistic in life, uh, basically you'll have a lot of temporary moments of pleasure, but you'll replace that. That will displace, that's a better way to say it, that will displace an overall contentment and happiness in your life. Many people who lead hedonistic lifestyles, they do it for a while and then they realize how empty their life is at the end. Then he talks about friend and enemy focus. So certainly on the friend side of it, if you're too much tied into social media or whether people like you or not, you have no control over that. Some people are not going to like you, and that's okay. That I would argue is actually the beauty of life. Is that we're all different. We all have different views and opinions and ways to look at the world, and in some ways that makes for a beautiful world, but also makes for a very adversarial world. And then enemy focus. There are some people who focus their lives just around revenge, trying to get back at somebody, and that just hatred just wastes a lot of your energy and time. One of the things he calls a church-centeredness. Remember that Stephen Covey was a Christian. He was very involved in his church community, but not, of course, the fact that he's saying this, not to an unhealthy extent, but he was. I can't remember the. I'm going to say Mormon, but don't quote me on that. I put this into religion and spiritual focus, and I put this into competition because some people, and I've witnessed it myself, some people compete spiritually with other people that, oh, well, they want to be the most pious person in the synagogue or the church or wherever they are. And I mean, that kind of goes back into the social acceptance thing. But I think and Stephen Covey, I'm sure, would agree with me. Spirituality and religious life is important. It enhances your life, but you don't want to make it the center of your life. And then this is where I think he used centeredness because it sounds better to say self-centered than self-focused. But that, of course, is narcissism. Nobody likes a narcissist, of course. Now, in terms of happiness, the interesting thing is narcissists, I think, do report higher levels of happiness, even though nobody likes them. So it's a very rather interesting kind of situation. And then he makes this point, which seems self-evident, but as I as I went through that list, you probably could think of other people who had an unhealthy focus on one or more of these things, but it's very difficult to see that in ourselves. But it's a good thing to at least ponder and meditate on whether you're focusing too much on this. And then, of course, he says, instead of focusing on these, if I look at this, other than the self-focus, this is mostly external things, right? He says instead, focus on our principles that guide us throughout our lives. And then he goes back to revisits this idea. I'm just going to go back a few slides. This center of influence. Then he revisits it and puts a different framing on security, which is again, it's our sense of self-worth, and these are the to quote him, deep fundamental truths that remain constant throughout our lives. And then the wisdom and guidance. When we focus on our principles and we have good principles, we create healthy maps based in reality. So the maps are the kind of the conceptualizations that you have of the external world. And then our power lies in our self-awareness. So not in your job or your social positions or community positions and things like that. So then he goes on to talk about more about the personal mission statement and just some guidelines to how to write it. He says tap into your right brain, try not to make it a left brain exercise. He also thinks, and I think this is about um, legacy and imagining your life, depending on where you are in life, to think of the phases in your life. So, finishing university, meeting someone, getting married, your 10th, 20th, your 30th anniversary, and when you stop working, your retirement. And then he talks about using affirmations to reframe your visualizations. And then he gives some tips for effective affirmation. So we have it here. Make the affirmation personal. Make it positive. One of the interesting things is the mind, and there's lots of research done around this. The brain does not understand negative thought. So it's that common thing that if I were to say, don't think of a beach, the first thing you'll do is think of a beach because the mind doesn't understand negative things. So, and then make it in the present moment, not I will. Use words like I am and stuff like that. Try to make it visual. Try to create a picture of how a certain thing, like let's say you want to talk about a mission statement with you as a spouse. Try to imagine yourself visually interacting with your spouse, what you say, how you act, what kind of things you do. And then, of course, make it emotional. Um, so, and then I sort of was alluding to role-based mission statements. So not only have a mission statement just for your life as a whole, but what is your mission statement as being a spouse? If you have children, what is your mission statement for being a parent, an employee? I would also add to a boss. If you supervise people, people report to you, what is your mission statement as a supervisor? If you're in school, you're a student, and as a member of the overall community. And then this ensures that you're leading a balanced life so that um, you're not like, for instance, the employee. You're not a workaholic. You're not neglecting your other roles in life. And then he also talks about sitting down with your family. I think he did say that he had regular meetings with his family, like on an annual basis, to sit down, and the family would all collectively write a family mission statement. So then he goes through, what's a good process to write this mission statement. I think in what he would do, certainly on his overall mission statement, he would leave the family and leave work and go off to a cottage on a lake and spend a couple days pondering all these things. But I mean, you can put that much work into it if you want. But he starts off by just write freely for 15 minutes, which of course will be your rough draft. And then after you do that, then answer these following questions. So, who is someone you admire? And again, this could be very role based. We're going to go back from who's a spouse that you really admire? What about a parent that you really admire? What about somebody at work that you really admire, or somebody in your profession that you really admire? And then write down what are the traits that those people have that make you admire them, right? And then describe a time where you're deeply inspired. Could be, landscapes. You were a geography, I guess. You're out somewhere and you found something something beautiful. For me, I find a lot of music very inspiring. Then he has a tightrope analogy. So he goes, all right, let's say somebody took a tightrope and put it across the Grand Canyon. And now, of course, you'd have to be somewhat confident in your ability to do a tightrope. If I were to ever do that, I wouldn't do a tightrope across the Grand Canyon for anything. It doesn't matter because I don't know how to do that. But keep in mind that this is more of a visual. So, and if you were going to cross that tightrope, of course, meaning you could fall to your death, think who or what is so important in your life that you would cross that tightrope for. And then on the fourth thing here, if you were to be given a lot of money and say, as long as you go back to school, you're given money to go get your PhD or whatever, what would you study? And then write down 10 things that you love to do. And then write down the words coming to me, talisman, or what represents you. Could be an animal, a song, painting, piece of music. I think it's better to keep it visual. So animal or painting would be good. But yeah, I guess if you're stuck, you could do something non-visual, like, and then write down why. And then don't get too hung up on the end product. Going through this, going through the process is more important than what you have at the end. And that's, of course, the reason being is that your life circumstances are going to change. Things are going to be different 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. That's why, going back to the thing, he sat down and with his family on an annual basis to write a family mission statement. And I can't quite remember how often he'd go off, but let's assume that he every year. Like at work, you've got an annual performance review. Well, think about doing like an annual life review and thinking, okay, well, going forward, what is going to be, what do I want to be to other people, and what is life going to look like for me? And that's the end of the presentation. So I'm going to go back to this, turn that off, and then so that's habit 2. Basically, I'm going to sum it up again. Think before you act. Don't just go through and act, but think deeply. Think base those thoughts on principles that you've carefully mapped out and thought through. So I hoped you got something out of that. If you did, hit the like. Think about subscribing. I do apologize. I'll try to get a little more regular in getting these things out. But yeah, I have many more books to review, many more things to put out there. So thank you for listening, and take care.